Welcome to Embers of the Hearth. My name is Sam, and here, in the hush between breath and cinder, we listen. Not to the tales we've been told, those trimmed and tamed, polished smooth with the years, but to the ones still sharp with bone and soil, the ones that refuse to be buried, the ones that wake in the dark. This fire we sit beside, it does not warm us, not really. It burns low, steady, and ancient. It houses a remembering flame. Its embers hold the breath of old gods and the teeth marks of things older. Lean in, and you may feel it. The hum beneath the ash. Not a voice, but a pulse. Not a story, but a summons. Because folklore, at its core, is not gentle. It is not quaint. It is what we do with fear when we give it a name. And tonight we return to the beginning. Not our beginning, but a beginning that cracked the world wide open. One drenched in mud and marrow, in sacrifice and silence, in gods who do not love, but hunger. We travel to the heartlands of the Maya, where the world is not a gift, but a bargain, where blood is not a metaphor, where creation is not a miracle, but a mistake repeated until it bleeds correctly. This is not Eden. There is no serpent offering knowledge, no fruit of sin. There is only sky and sea, void and hunger, and a darkness so deep it has a language of its own. The gods you'll meet here do not cradle you. They carve, they devour, they mold you from clay, from wood, and from maize, then grind you back into the dust when you disappoint them. You are made to remember them, to bleed for them, to burn for them, and if you forget, the earth turns on you. The animals you've tamed tear out your throat. The trees you cut down strike back with bark and vengeance. Your children vanish into howls, swinging from branches, no longer human. There is no salvation here, only cycles. Creation, destruction, sacrifice, again and again, until the gods are satisfied. Yet, they are never satisfied. This is the story of how the world was made and unmade and made again, how men were formed from the meat of the earth, how skulls whispered in the underworld, and how laughter in Xibalba can kill. It is a tale older than the wheel, older than iron. It was carved into obsidian and blood, passed through the mouths of poets and priests, almost lost to time. Tonight I've drawn it from the dark, shaken off the lichen and bone dust, and held it to the fire. What I bring before you is not softened. It is cracked and smouldering, but it breathes. This is the Mayan creation myth, told not as scripture, but as scar. Not as memory, but as a ritual, a myth of unmaking, of divine failure, of hunger loud enough to shape the world. Settle in. The gods are watching. The embers are listening. And the story begins. Before bone, before tongue, before time clawed its name into the skin of the world, there was the black water. It did not sleep. It pulsed, heaving with something older than breath. A chaos without shape, without mercy. It had no shore, no surface, only the illusion of stillness, like the lull before a scream. It was not silent, though what it spoke could not be called sound. It hissed and muttered in languages far too raw for ears, the murmur of unborn gods, of undone things. Its waters were thick as clotted blood, blacker than unlit obsidian. And beneath that roiling skin, nothing lived, but everything waited. And above it, above that churning abyss, suspended like thoughts that had almost become dreams, were two presences, not gods in any familiar sense, not yet. They were the first thoughts, the first hungers, the first terrible will to shape. Tepu, the bone moulder, the sky thinker, his form wavered between man and mist, a silhouette of gold and shadow, his body like the outline of a giant carved into lightning, crackling with the bones of things not yet made. His fingers, when he chose to have them, were long and jointless, tools of sculptors and surgeons. His face was not a face, but a skull crowned in flame, not burning, but remembering fire. His breath came slow and deep, like the drawing of a blade from flesh. Beside him coiled Gukumots, serpent of the feathered veil. He was endless. He was adorned in the shimmer of rain-soaked jungle and the iridescent glow of bird gods not yet born. His feathers rippled like winds across a lake of oil, and beneath those silken plumes lay scales etched with glyphs that no living tongue could name. His eyes were stars, not reflections of stars, but the stars themselves, molten and watchful, weeping light like ancient wounds reopened. When he moved, the sky quaked. When he stilled, creation held its breath. They did not speak. Speech was still a crude thing. They did not need mouths when their dreams could split stone and stitch galaxies. They dreamed, and their dreams were not kind. They dreamed of form, not for joy, not for love, but for order, control, witness. From those dreams, the world was ripped screaming from the dark. Mountains burst upward from the deep like fists punching through coffins. Jagged and furious, they tore the sky as they rose, bleeding magma and ash, their peaks gnawed by wind and hate. Oceans slithered into being like beasts uncoiling from sleep, not gentle, but ravenous, eager to bite, to consume, to shape their own prey. They foamed like mouths rabid with salt, chewing at the newborn skin of the world until it wept rivers. The sky, the sky was a crime. It was flayed into being, stretched taut across the void like the hide of a sacrificed beast. The stars were not placed, they were driven in, nailed like eyes to the inside of a coffin, watching and waiting. Their light dripped red, like the last tears of gods, too tired to scream. Still, the world lay hollow, a husk, a sculpture with no blood, and Tapu and Gukumots, those architects of awe and terror, hungered, not for worship, not yet, but for completion, for witnesses, for something that would remember them, and so they dreamed again. From the slick banks of riverbeds, where the black water still whispered and the air clung like wet skin, the gods bent low. They scooped handfuls of earth, not dry or clean, but wet, ripe and foul, clay slick with silt and the grease of stillborn stars. It steamed under their touch, not from heat, but from something deeper, rot, the kind of warmth that comes from meat forgotten beneath the sun and flies. Bloating with gases, it was ready to rupture. And from that living muck, Tapu and Gukumots began to mould. They shaped forms, fragile, urgent things, bodies bent in arcs like half-formed questions, spines curled like fern shoots, ribs etched like cage bars into soft bellies. Their fingers were traced with exquisite care, long and trembling, each joint a deliberate prayer, eyes obsidian chips slicked with river mucus, were pressed into sockets, still pulsing with warmth. Mouths were carved open as if to scream, though no breath yet stirred their tongues. They looked like men, almost. It was enough to fool the dark. For a moment the gods paused, watching and waiting. Their silence was a held breath across eternity. But then came the rain, not gentle, not life-giving. It came as punishment, thick as phlegm and cold as grave water. It fell not in drops, but in gobs, as though the sky itself were vomiting in disgust. The claymen shivered, then they shuddered, and they began to break. Their joints softened into pulp, their faces sloughed sideways, cheeks caving in like spoiled fruit beneath thumb pressure. Their jaws were unhinged, swung open in a slow, ruinous melting. Tongues were sliding loose like eels in their death throes, arms sagging into noodles of earth and gore, fingers detaching and plopping into the mud, one by one, like teeth from a corpse left too long unburied. Where once was a chest, there was a cavity, a hollow pool where breath refused to settle. Where once was a spine, there now lay a twisted length of sludge, as if the earth itself had spat them back out. They moaned, not in pain. Pain requires a mind to know it. They moaned like the wind through a hollow tree, like broken flutes played by trembling hands. Not words, not even animal cries, just noise. As though the very act of existence was being denied by the world around them, and Tapu and Gukumots, watching from the edge of that rotting birth site, said nothing. They watched their would-be children dissolve into the filth from which they came, watched their hands, once so careful, now curl in disgust. No wrath, no pity, just disappointment, cold and final. Then they rose, and with a movement that cracked the world's teeth, they crushed whatever remained. Divine feet, lightless and infinite, descended upon the quivering mockery. Bones never formed were powdered. Faces never finished were smeared across the riverbed. Clay and flesh, eye and socket, limb and cry, all pressed deep into the mud. There was no burial, only absorption. The earth took back what it had loaned, swallowing the failed dreams without protest, and nothing remained. No name, no mark, not even memory. Just a silence thick with shame, and gods who now understood that form alone was not enough. There must be blood. There must be sacrifice. And above all, there must be fear. Only then could a creature be worthy of breath. The gods tried again. The failure of clay still clung to their forts like mildew, but they would not relent. Creation was no longer an act of wonder. It had become a compulsion, a need to be seen, to be worshipped, to be remembered. This time they turned to the sacred trees. Those ancient sentinels rooted deep within the marrow of the world, their branches clawing the sky like the fingers of drowned men, their bark thick with memory and grief. They bled them slowly. The sap ran thick and red, more blood than resin, sweet and cloying with the scent of rot and old wounds, and with knives hammered from the ribs of thunder. They carved men from that living wood. These were no soft things. These were hollow-chested, sharp-jointed creatures with knotted sinews and limbs that cracked when they moved. Their skin was dry and striated like bark, their eyes dark and depthless as old wells. They stood, they ran, their mouths opened and language spilled out. Not prayer, not song, just flat, chattering syllables, empty noise, like birds mimicking the voice of gods they no longer remember. They spread, they filled the valleys, built shelters of stone and straw, filled the sky with smoke. They planted, they hunted, they bore children and gave them names. And in all this, they offered nothing. No blood, no incense, no whispered thanks beneath the stars. The gods were forgotten, not feared, not cursed, simply ignored. The divine silence turned bitter. Their eyes narrowed to slits of stormlight. Their rage coiled slow and quiet, like a serpent waiting in the roots. And then they punished. Not with fire, not with flood, but with a turning of the world against its own children. At midnight, their dogs turned wild, their eyes flickering red with ancient memory. They tore their masters' throats as though reclaiming something owed. No growls, no warnings, just blood and betrayal. Their hearts betrayed them. The pots boiled over, and the food within screamed, not metaphor, screamed, with voices not their own, with the fury of ancestors and gods, with the agony of forgotten things. And the trees, the very trees from which they had been shaped, remembered. Their branches twisted into spears, roots surged from beneath the earth like veins clogged with wrath. Walls buckled, homes split open like fruit left too long in the sun. The earth choked on its children. The survivors fled. They stumbled into wilderness, moaning in a tongue that no longer made sense, their minds unraveling like frayed rope. Their skin thickened, roughened, bark split their spines, their hands curled into gnarled claws. They forgot who they were. They forgot why they had been made, until they were no longer men, until they became monkeys. And even now, their howls echo through the canopy, wild and shrill and half-mad. Laughter shaped like mockery, like shame turned inside out. The forest remembers what they forgot. Not all stories are born in the light. Some are dragged from beneath it, from the black underlayer of the world, where warmth curdles and time loses its shape, where forgotten gods slumber with open eyes, where the breath of the earth grows thick and putrid, choked with vapor and the slow decay of memory. This place is called Xibalba. It is not a land of fire. There are no lakes of brimstone, no devils with pitchforks. Xibalba is colder than flame, quieter than death, and far more patient. It lies beneath the crust of creation, like a bruise beneath the skin, swollen, festering, veined with tunnels that drip with a shower sheen. Its sky is made of stone, its rivers cruel with blood, and a pale ichor of spoiled things. Sound does not echo there, it clings. Here laughter curdles, here hope becomes a stain that cannot be scrubbed away. And in this realm of perpetual dusk reign the lords of death. 12 of them, or more, or less. Their number changes like a wound that grows or shrinks depending on how deep you press. But the first to step from the shadows are always these. Shiki Ripat, the flying scab, who lays fevers like gifts in the chest and paints phlegm across the lungs with his breath. Kuchu Makik, the blood drinker, whose name tastes like iron, and whose hands squeeze the vessels until they burst behind the eyes. A Halpa, the pus demon, who walks barefoot over flesh and leaves trails of swelling blisters. A Holgana, the jaundice demon, who speaks only in whispers that yellow the bones. Cha Miabak, the bone staff, who counts vertebrae like beads and replaces marrow with cold. These lords are not loud. They are not monstrous in the way of giants or dragons. They are far more insidious. They wear death like perfume, sweet, sickly, cloying. They adorn themselves in the stink of old bandages, in the bile of forgotten tombs. Their flesh is lacquered in sores that shine like polished amber. Their eyes are calm and always watchful. They despise joy. The sound of mirth curdles them. The beat of a heart stirs their ancient bitterness. And so, when Hunapu and Wukub Hunapu, the two divine brothers of the surface world, dared to play, to strike the sacred rubber ball on the stone court beneath the golden eye of the sun, the lords heard it. That thudding, rhythmic beat, a heartbeat they could not silence. A song not meant for the dark, an affront, so they summoned the brothers, but not with messengers, with dreams that bled into waking, with the twitching of shadows that bent toward the court, with the sudden cold that seeps into the spine without reason. The brothers descended, not into the earth, but through it, past roots that trembled, through caves slick with lichenous whispers, into the jaws of Xibalba. They were led like lambs, garlanded with illusions, into trials. The first trial, the house of knives, where the walls wept blades. The second trial, the house of cold, where even their breath froze to their teeth. The third trial, the house of jaguars, where unseen eyes circled and waited. The house of screams, where voices shrieked without mouths. The house of darkness, which blinded not only the eyes, but also the mind, and others. Houses with no names, tests meant not for courage, but for dismemberment of the soul. The brothers, clever, strong, and divine, failed. They were tricked. They were broken. They were killed. Their skulls were taken and kept as trophies by the lords, but one, Hunapu, was not buried. Instead, they hung his severed head on the bare limb of a calabash tree as a warning, or perhaps a temptation. The tree, cursed by death, withered into a thing not quite alive. Its bark split, its fruit came in strange shapes, too round, too smooth. It smelt faintly of blood and spice and graves. And then one day Ishkik came, a maiden, innocent but not ignorant, drawn by dreams she could not name. She walked beneath the tree, and the head of Hunapu spoke. It whispered things the wind would not carry, dark, yearning things, secrets too ancient for words. She laughed briefly, not in joy, but in disbelief, and that was enough. The skull spat, a dry hiss through the teeth of a god. And into her palm it released something unseen, something warm and invisible, something alive. Her womb twisted like a serpent in water. Within her, two seeds took root, twins, bound not by flesh alone, but by vengeance, by destiny, and by the memory of suffering. They would be called Hunapu and Xibalba, sons of darkness, sons of trickery, sons of a god who died laughing. They did not grow like children. There were no lullabies, no clumsy steps, no soft hands to guide them. They emerged, fully formed, terrible, still slick with the weight of prophecy. They did not cry, they listened, to the bones in the dirt, to the blood in the rivers, to the low hum of names that should have been buried but were not. Hunapu and Xibalba, twins not of the cradle, but of vengeance, not born but summoned. They knew what had been done, and they knew what must be undone. They descended into Xibalba, not with trembling limbs or prayers on their lips, but with knives behind their smiles, and laughter that curled like smoke beneath a locked door. The lords of death welcomed them with the same cruelties their father had faced. The house of knives, the house of cold, the house of screams. But the twins were not like him. They did not stumble. They did not plead. They let the trials come, and they played. They let themselves be torn apart, not once, but many times. They were burned, dissected, their bones ground fine as maize meal. Their ashes were scattered like regret across the rivers of the dead, and the river whispered. It stirred, it swallowed, and then from its stagnant surface the twins rose again, no longer flesh, but divinity reborn in bone-white fire. They were changed, terrible in their beauty, gods made not of love or light, but of cunning and memory. They returned to Xibalba with new faces. The lords did not recognize them. For what god expects his prey to return resurrected and wrathful? The twins danced. They performed wonders. Their limbs moved like smoke and lightning. They conjured death as illusion, as theatre. One slit the other's throat, and the body shuddered and then rose, grinning through a ragged wound that spilled no blood. The corpse danced. The lords clapped with gnarled hands. They laughed, thin and hollow. "Do it to us," they cried. "Show us your magic. Let us taste that death and return." And the twins, smiling now, wide and full of teeth, obliged. But there was no return. One by one, the lords were butchered, their guts offered to the soil, their bones cracked and fed to the trees, their names stripped from memory like bark from rotwood. Silence fell across Xibalba. Not peace, just the hush that comes when even death is not certain anymore. The twins left that place not as boys, not as sons, but as gods. One climbed into the sky to become the sun, burning and watchful, the eye that sees all, that never blinks. The other retreated into the dark, becoming the moon, the eye that weeps in silence, the mirror of memory, keeper of all things lost. And thus the world had its watchers, not benevolent, not cruel, just there, eternal, to remind us that creation is not born from kindness, but from the bones of what came before, and the gods, they do not forget. At long last, the gods found their holy flesh, not in the soft crumble of clay, nor in the brittle mimicry of wood, but in maize, the marrow of the earth, the breath between rain and sun, the golden vein that winds through the ribs of the world. It was not mere food, it was flesh, sacred, bleeding, and divine. They ground the kernels between stones slick with centuries of wear. The rhythm of the grinding like a low chant, a heartbeat rising from deep within the soil. They mixed it with blood, not of men, but of gods, tongue-sliced, bitter and thick, spat into the fire that did not burn, but remembered. With ash-streaked hands, they shaped these new bodies, not fragile, not hollow, but luminous, dense with the weight of hunger, with the terrible gift of memory. These new people awoke with knowing in their marrow. They saw, they looked through the seams of the world and saw too much. Time to them was not a river, but a serpent, coiled and hissing, winding back to its own tail. They could see the days yet to come, their own deaths singing in the distance like flutes at a funeral. They whispered the true names of the gods in their sleep, names wrapped in silence for eons, names that should not have survived the dark. They spoke truths that had not yet been carved into stone. They knew the shape of the sky before it was bent. They saw what was to come, and it bled. The gods who had carved men with thunder, who had crushed mockeries into mud, now looked upon their perfect creations and trembled, not with pride, with fear. Fear that they had made something too close to themselves, or worse, something that might surpass them. And so they reached into the eyes of their creation, those shining mirrors that saw too deeply, and they dimmed them, not fully, not cruelly, but enough. They clouded the vision, dampened the flame that burned too bright in their skulls. They blunted understanding like knives dulled after too much truth. And thus the first true people walked the world, not gods, but not beasts either. Powerful in their pain, they built cities from obsidian and bone. They lifted stones like prayers. They carved calendars to hold back time. Their altars drank sunlight and blood. Willingly they tore open their own chests, offering hearts that beat with fear and reverence alike to feed the gods they could no longer fully see, but still remembered in their bones. They bled not in terror, but in honor. They cut open the sky with song and smoke, and it answered in rain. Their blood rose like incense, and the gods watching from the edges of creation were satisfied, not with love, but with the hunger sated for now. And the people endured, half blind, half divine, carved from maize, bound to sacrifice. A covenant written not in ink, but in blood, in ash, in the terrible beauty of knowing one's place between heaven and Xibalba. At this point in our descent, where the last embers gutter low and the night hangs heavy with silence, I will leave you with a final offering. Not quite an ending, but a cairn of thought placed in the soft loam beneath myth and memory. The Popol Vuh, as many know it, is a tale of beginnings, ritualistic, rhythmic, cyclical, a myth told in fragments, echoes, reverent chants carved into brittle bark and buried in time. It's often shared with reverence, yes, but also with distance, as though it were something too sacred to touch, too brittle to breathe new life into. But myths are not relics, they are teeth, they are wounds that remember, and in telling this version, I've stepped deeper into the dirt. I've let the gods bleed, let the mud rot, let the voices of the failed creations cry out, not as symbols, but as suffering. I've followed the curve of the obsidian blade, and I've held my breath in Xibalba long enough to hear the laughter turn hollow. This is not the version softened for classrooms, not the one scrawled into museum placards and half-remembered textbooks. This is the story as it might have been told in firelight beneath a thatched sky when the world still pulsed with blood sacrifice and the stars were watchful eyes, not wishes. In this telling, creation is not divine, it is desperate, clumsy and brutal, repeated until it hurts enough to matter. The gods are not distant, they are flawed, they are hungry, and most of all, they are blinded with power. They try and fail and try again, not out of love, but out of need. They do not cradle humanity, they wring it until it feeds the sun. And man is not the crown of creation. He is the crop, the currency, and the consequence. Born of maize and marrow, sustained only by remembering who came first and what price was paid. And when he forgets, he is unmade just as easily. What drew me into this myth wasn't the grandeur of it, not the pantheon, not the cosmology, but the ache, the deep grinding ache of creation forced through failure, the ghosts of those who were almost human, those made of mud, of wood, of silence, each one crushed, drowned, torn apart by the very world that birthed them. It made me wonder, how many stories do we carry in our bones? How many failed versions of ourselves do we bury and pretend we're never there? How many gods have we served and forgotten while their shadows still follow? This story has no hero, no redemption, only repetition. And that's the point. Creation is not a single spark. It is the ash after, the blood beneath the altar, the memory that hurts. So the next time the world feels heavy in your hands, when the sun seems too slow to rise and the night too loud with teeth, remember, there was a time when the gods made men from mud and from wood and from corn, and each time they failed, each time they tried again. We are what remains, not chosen, not perfect, just survivors, and sometimes that's enough. Thank you for listening to Embers of the Hearth. Until next time, tread carefully and remember what was given so you could remain.